Hey guys, I know a lot of you are interested in the new AOS 5 and AOS 5.5 V2 frames. So I'm going to put a little bit more information at the end, and these frames are now live. You can go order them on CNC Drones. I'm going to be working on a design description video for these over the next few days. But if you want to check them out before then, you can. I'll put a link down in the video description.
Hi there everybody. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to set up your rates in Betaflight 4.3 to get the best possible stick feel for your quad. And when I talk about rates, I mean rates in the widest possible sense. So we're also going to be talking about Throttle Limit, Throttle Expo and RC smoothing, which are all really important settings that you should know about and be using to get the stick feel you want. But before I talk you through how to set up your rates, I want to provide a perspective on the Betaflight flies better versus the KISS flies better controversy that has been blowing up again recently. This is a perennial argument, and there are generally people that come down on one side or the other. My goal here is not to take sides, but rather to provide a perspective that I think will allow both sides to agree and come together on the issue, and hopefully that will be of benefit to everyone. It's a lot to do in one video, so let's not waste any time and let's get started. I find that when talking about flight feel, people fall into two camps. There's the set point tracking camp, where people look at logging and HD video to see which firmware is able to track the control signal, or the set point, better than other firmware. And they would say that the firmware that's able to track the control signal best is the one that flies the best. And then the second camp is the flight feel camp. And this group of people feel that having flown several different firmwares, they have a preference. They have a firmware which they feel feels the best. And that improved flight feel is what they would use to define which firmware flies better. So you can obviously see where the argument can come in, because people are assessing the firmwares on different criteria. And my perspective on the issue is the following. I would say that PID tuning, and therefore set point tracking, or the ability to follow a control signal, when taken alone, doesn't determine stick feel. So this basically allows both of these positions to be correct at the same time. And I think that that makes sense, because it's quite clear from looking at the data from the set point tracking group that certainly their position is correct. And I think it's also true, looking at the flight feel group, that there are enough people who feel that there's a significant difference that that is also correct and true. So you have to take the assumption that both camps are right. Otherwise you just can't make progress. For the set point tracking camp, I would say that even if you can get your quad to track the set point or the control signal absolutely perfectly, it still won't feel good to fly if your rates, throttle and RC smoothing aren't set up correctly for your flying style. And that's what we're going to be looking at later in this video. So set point tracking alone isn't enough to get a quad that feels good to fly. To the flight feel camp, I would say that poor set point tracking does negatively affect flight feel in certain challenging flight situations. So even if you have a firmware that feels very good to fly, if it's got poor set point tracking, that is going to negatively affect flight feel in certain situations. So why doesn't the tune of the PID controller really affect flight feel all that much? Well, the goal of the PIDs is sort of to disappear. And what I mean by that is that when the PID controller is pretty well tuned, the quad here is just going to follow the set point. It's going to follow the set point closely, especially if you're flying relatively smoothly and not doing a lot of aggressive moves. And in this case, you're not really going to feel the effect of the PIDs at all, because you're really feeling the effect of the rates and RC filtering that you have applied, because the quad is doing what the set point is telling it to do. However, there are certain situations where the PIDs do matter for flight feel, but it's not as often as you might think. So The PIDs really affect flight feel in prop wash handling, flying in high winds or very turbulent air, where there's a lot of outside influences that are disturbing the quad, and the PIDs need to compensate for that to keep the quad doing what you're telling it to do. Full stick flips and rolls, especially with very high rates, are another area which really taxes the PID controller. So if your PIDs aren't well tuned, you are going to feel an effect of the PID tune in that situation where you're doing a snap flip or snap roll. And aggressive throttle punches and chops, if your PID controller is not well tuned, you're going to get bobbles when you punch and chop the throttle. However, I would say that these three situations, occur pretty rarely. Experienced pilots tend to intuitively fly around prop wash, and some styles are more smooth with the sticks and with the throttle than others, and those smoother styles are going to be less affected by the PID tune than snappier, more aggressive styles. So we can now agree that good set point tracking, while valuable and important, isn't enough on its own to give you good flight feel. You also need something else. So what else do you need? Well, the answer is to get your rates and RC smoothing well tuned. So that's the topic of this video. And I would say that for people flying Betaflight 4.3, honestly, your rates and RC smoothing are going to make more of a difference to how your quad feels to fly than your PID tune. So you definitely want to be spending plenty of time getting your rates and RC smoothing right. So that's my opinion. I hope you think that I got it right. If you think I did, please hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And please leave a comment down below on what your opinion is and your preferred setup for best flight feel. Now on with the rates tuning. For those of you who are maybe new to Betaflight, your rates are what map your stick positions to a certain rate of rotation or a certain throttle value in the air. So it's not a linear scale when you move your stick. There's less sensitivity at the middle of the stick travel and more sensitivity towards the end of the stick travel. And the reason that we do that is so that you can both have a nice, snappy, fast rotation at full stick deflection, but also have a very smooth, controllable feel to the quad when you're just moving your sticks around near the center position. It's to give you both precision and wide dynamic range at the same time. RC smoothing is a function in Betaflight which filters sudden jerky stick movements to give a smoother flight feel. And this is a really, really important setting to be able to get the right feel in your quad for the type of flying that you like to do. So first things first, where can we find all of these settings? Well, let's start by looking at rates. So in the PID Tuning tab, there's a tab called Rate Profile Settings. And here you'll be able to find the rates for roll, pitch and yaw. And you'll also be able to find the throttle limit, which you should definitely set to scale, and the Throttle Expo and Throttle Mid settings, which we're going to talk about later in the video. If you're looking for RC smoothing, you can find that in the Receiver tab. And it's just here, RC smoothing. I would typically leave the smoothing mode set to on, the set point to auto, and just change this auto factor. That's really the only thing you need to tune. We're going to start with the throttle because I think that Throttle Expo and Throttle Limit are perhaps the most underappreciated settings in all of Betaflight. Everyone should know what these settings do and everyone should be using them because they really make a huge difference to how precise your quad feels in the air. Throttle Limit is a way to increase your throttle resolution if you find that you don't often use full throttle. So if you have a build that's got a very high thrust to weight ratio, you will probably find that you very rarely, if ever, actually go to full throttle because the quad just moves so quickly as you increase the throttle that you just never need all that power. If you are in that position where you very rarely go full throttle, then you can set a throttle limit, typically between 75 and 100%, and that will lower the amount of throttle that the quad has at full stick deflection. So if you push the throttle stick all the way up, you won't actually be getting full throttle. You'll be getting whatever you set in the throttle limit percent here. But the trade-off, the benefit that you get for giving up that last 10% of throttle is you get more resolution across the whole throttle range. And that's actually really, really beneficial, particularly for precision flying and controlling your altitude. Throttle limit is different to motor output limit in that it won't affect the PID controller. So the PID controller can still use full throttle to stabilize the quad if it needs to. It's just going to affect your maximum throttle position on the sticks. Let's talk about Throttle Mid and Expo now. Throttle Mid should be set to the throttle position that you use when you're just cruising around in level forward flight. You can get this by looking at logs or by using the throttle position OSD element, which will tell you your throttle percent when you're just cruising around in level forward flight. That's going to be the value that you want to set for your throttle mid. And it's going to depend on the weight of your quad, the amount of camera up tilt that you're running, the props that you're using, all of that stuff. Once you've got your throttle mid set right, you can then increase your throttle expo to something like 0.5 or even more to get more throttle resolution for flying under low objects, controlling altitude, and generally just flying precisely. Having throttle expo on will really, really help your precision flying. And I like to use quite a lot of throttle expo, 0.5 or sometimes even more. And I think more people should be using it because it's just a completely accepted fact that having more sensitivity around center stick and less sensitivity at full stick deflection is what you want for roll, pitch, and yaw. And it's also what you want for the throttle as well. You want more resolution in the zone where you need to be precise and less resolution at full throttle and zero throttle. RC smoothing is another setting that I don't think is used enough, and it is a must-have setting for freestyle pilots and cinematic pilots. What RC smoothing does is filter your stick input to the quad to give a smoother flight feel. So it's going to smooth out any jerky or twitchy stick movements to give a quad a nice smooth control input to follow. And that's really important for having a smooth flying quad and getting rid of twitches and jerks in your HD footage. RC smoothing really gives you the best of both worlds because you can have a very locked feeling quad that is really well tuned and tracks your control inputs really, really precisely. And you can also have this really buttery smooth stick response. It's like flying a Cadillac. It just feels like it's got a lot of weight and a lot of damping. It's just a very smooth feel in the air. The default in Betaflight for RC smoothing is really designed for racing. And if you're flying freestyle, you are going to want to increase that quite a lot. In fact, you probably want to start at least 50 or 60 and increase from there until you get the right feel. If you're a freestyle pilot or a Cinewoop pilot who's looking for a more cinematic feel, I would suggest you start around 100 and possibly even increase from there, because that's going to give you that really smooth feel that you're looking for in your HD footage. I want to take a moment to compare using RC smoothing to some common PID tuning approaches to getting a smooth feeling quad. If you try to get a smooth feeling quad by PID tuning, you're going to have unwanted side effects. So one way in which you can make a quad feel smoother is to reduce feed forward, because feed forward can make the quad feel a little bit twitchy because it really kicks the quad into any stick movements that you make. However, if you reduce feed forward, it will make the quad feel less twitchy, but it will also make the set point tracking worse. And that's going to cause issues with things like I-turn windup, which is going to give you potentially slow bounce back on fast moves. Also, even if you reduce feed forward, you're still going to have the P term, which can react to shaking sticks. And if you were to try and reduce the P term to make the quad feel smoother, that's going to negatively affect your prop wash handling and also cause I term wind up as well. So you can't really smooth out the quad with PID tuning approaches without having unwanted side effects, particularly in the I term. If, however, you use RC smoothing to smooth up the quad, because you're filtering the RC signal before you get to the set point, it doesn't have the same side effects. The PID controller is still feeling like it's following the set point really, really closely, so you don't have anything like I term wind up. And also the P term isn't going to be reacting to any shakes or twitches because they will have been filtered out before they get to the set point. So if you're looking for a smooth feel, RC smoothing is the way to go. Don't use any of the PID tuning approaches, reducing feed forward or reducing P term or anything like that, because you're actually going to end up having a quad that flies less well at the end of it. Now let's talk about rates, and Betaflight 4.3 changes the default rates to actual rates. And this means that you should never ever paste your rates from 4.2 into 4.3. If you paste Betaflight rates from 4.2 into 4.3, it will interpret them as actual rates, and that will be very, very bad. So you definitely just want to type them back in. Actual rates, in my opinion, are a little more intuitive than traditional Betaflight rates, so it makes it a little easier to find what works best for you. The values that I'm going to suggest in this video are only suggestions, and unlike PIDs, rates are not objective. They're very personal, and there's no right answer, there's only what's right for you. So you should really feel empowered to go out and find the rates that you like best. Let's start with center stick sensitivity, and this determines how sensitive the quad is to movements of the sticks close to center. And so this is going to give you that precision when you're trying to fly through tight gaps and when you're trying to make precise movements where you're moving the stick very little and you're very, very close to that center position. I would say that a center sensitivity of 50 or even less is pretty good for proximity flying, very cinematic flying, and precision flying in really tight spaces. For typical freestyle flying, something like 70, which is the default, or even a little more, maybe 100, is just about right. And dynamic flying styles, spangs bang, some line of sight flying styles, and racing like a little bit more center sensitivity in general. They tend to run more like 200. So depending on what type of flying you're doing, you'll find the center sensitivity that's right for you. Max rate determines just how fast the quad is going to rotate at the full stick deflection. Racing and cinematic flying, they tend to go for a lower max rate, something around 400 or 500 degrees a second. I know Evan Turner, 533 for him, of course. Typical freestyle flying tends to be around 700, and the Betaflight default is 670. And really snappy style freestyle flying tends to have a higher max rate, something around 1100 degrees per second or even a little more than that. And that's the style that you tend to see people like Mr. Steele flying, where they can do those really, really fast snap flips and rolls. Expo is a little bit more difficult to explain. Expo extends the influence of the center stick sensitivity setting. And what I mean by this is if you have a very large expo, like this blue line here, the stick sensitivity remains pretty similar to what it is at the center stick position for most of the stick travel. If, however, you have very small amount of expo, the sensitivity starts to change immediately as you move the stick away from center. And so as you move the stick away from center, that sensitivity is going to increase much more quickly. And you can see the effect of changing the expo in this graph here. And you can see that when you're changing it in the configurator. So you can kind of see what effect the change is having. In general, I don't run much expo on my rates, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. If you find that you really like having a more linear feel towards the center stick position, then definitely try adding a bit of expo.
I hope this video helps you to find that perfect flight feel when you're getting set up with Betaflight 4.3 and tuning it on your quad. I think that the improved set point tracking of 4.3 versus 4.2 and pretty much any other firmware is definitely something that's really worth having. And if you can get the right flight feel by getting your rate set correctly, RC smoothing set correctly, and your throttle configured just right, you are going to have a better flight experience with a firmware that tracks set point better. So I hope this video helps you to do that. If you like this work and you'd like to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon. If you feel like I've earned your support with this video and the previous videos I've done, then I'll put a link down in the video description to where you can find that. And you can join from just a few dollars a month, and you get some nice perks on my Discord server and some sneak peeks of the upcoming projects that I'm working on. That's all I have for you for today. So until next time, I wish you all very happy flying. So I promised you a little sneak peek of the AOS 5 V2 and AOS 5.5 V2. So this is the AOS 5 V2. Lots of updates from the V1 frame, but I think the one that I'm most proud of is the aesthetics of this frame. Some people have said it looks kind of insect-like. Other people have said the arm design kind of looks like a spider's web. I really like the way this looks. I mean, the AOS 5 V1 wasn't a bad looking frame, but I think this one really takes it to the next level. The arm design, the arm geometry has got changed quite a lot. We now have a strut in here that's more durable in front impact, and it's also a little bit stiffer, so the resonance performance is even better. We've got a 3-point motor mounting rather than 4-screw motor mounting, and that just removes a hole that causes a stress riser in front impact, so it should make the arm even more durable as well. On the top plate, we've got captive battery straps. So the battery straps can't move around. They're kind of captive in the top plate. So a feature that a lot of people ask for. And there's also an XT60 here, pass through the top plate. So you can keep all of those wires away from the props. You never cut your battery leads with the props. The GoPro mount on the front of the AOS 5 V2 now has press nuts in the top plate. So you can just screw straight down into those press nuts. Makes mounting the GoPro super easy, and of course it uses exactly the same 32x32 mounting that other AOS frames use. The stack situation, we have 3 stacks in the AOS 5 V2, front, middle and rear, and they all support 30x30, and they all support the new 1W VTX by HD0, so you can fit that in this frame as well. If you use an air unit in the back, then you just need to move your stack to the front position in the AOS 5. But if you're using something like a Vista or Analog or anything like that, Sharkbite, then you can run a central stack and put the VTX in the rear. The AOS 5.5 V2 looks really similar. In fact, if you didn't put them side by side, you probably couldn't tell the difference. It's just a little bit of a bigger platform, can run 5.5-inch props rather than, I think the maximum is 5.2. On the AOS 5. I think you might be able to squeeze 5.25 in, but it's going to be very tight. See how you go. But this can run up to 5.5-inch props. It's a bit of a bigger platform, and you can put an air unit in the back of this and still run a full-size stack in the middle, just because it's a slightly bigger platform. Both frames don't have props in view. Both frames have the press nuts for the GoPro, the captive battery straps, the XT60 pass-through, and support either a 20mm or 19mm camera. So I'm going to do a full design description of these frames, but that's a quick rundown of the main features, and I'll put a link down in the video description to where you can check it out, get a bit more information, and order one if you'd like to try it.